right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Fenn, and I'm Director of Newcomer Policy and Practice at Californians Together, where we are proud to partner with the California Department of Social Services in supporting the CalNEW program. Today, we're here to discuss policy and strategies for making our schools safe, supportive, and welcoming spaces for newcomer students. Please feel free to ask any questions using the Q&A feature, and we'll get to them either in that feature or at the end. And there are a lot of great resources for reference in this presentation, and the recordings of the slides will be emailed out to you next week. They'll also be posted and hosted on calnew.net. And let's go ahead and get started. First, we want to start by sharing that this webinar is supported by the CalNEW program, which was developed by the state legislature to support socioeconomically disadvantaged newcomer youth and their families through the school system. This initiative, which is administered by the California Department of Social Services, provides grants to 21 school districts across California and works to spread knowledge and best practices in newcomer education and well-being. Every year, CalNEW is proud to support districts and their staff who show incredible dedication to supporting basic needs, engaging families, and developing youth academics and leadership skills. Thank you for all being here today as part of that mission. And today we are really pleased to have joining us the All In for Safe Schools campaign led by Californians Together and the Children's Partnership. Welcome, All In for Safe Schools team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Today, we will be talking about safe, supportive, and welcoming schools for our newcomers and students of immigrant families. And so who are we? Well, my name is Amber Riemann, and I'm a professional learning specialist with Californians Together. And I'm going to pass it over to Lisa, who's going to introduce herself.
Thanks, Amber. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Davis. I'm the director. I'm an advocacy director for children and immigrant families at an organization called the Children's Partnership. The Children's Partnership is a California advocacy organization that works to advance child health equity through research, policy, and community engagement. And I'm also formerly a public interest attorney. I'll kick it back to you, Amber.
Awesome. Thank you. So who is All In for Safe Schools? Well, we are a California-based campaign that brings together early childhood education and TK through 12 nonprofit leaders to support educators in creating welcoming, inclusive, and affirming spaces, especially for children in immigrant families and LGBTQ plus students. And you can see the different organization under our umbrella of All In for Safe Schools here. We're really working to be proactive and also to kind of meet the moment that we're in today. So a quick disclaimer, the following Know Your Rights content and information is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. So this presentation includes information that some might find upsetting, so please do what you need to do to really take care of yourself throughout this session. Today's agenda, we will be talking about safe school policy and implementation. We will be talking about access to public benefits. And lastly, we'll end with mental health and social emotional support for students. And I'm going to pass it back to Lisa.
Thanks, Amber. So many of the changes in policy and practice coming from the federal government are already impacting children's access to things like food programs, housing, legal assistance, and culturally responsive supports. As many of you know well, children from low-income families and children in immigrant families are feeling an impact on their ability to access education because of actions against immigrant communities of colors, especially extra vulnerable populations like newcomer students. So let's get into that a little bit more. The chilling effect of anti-immigration policies is something that a lot of people are researching and writing about and talking about. Collectively, these policy changes have made many more children vulnerable to being separated from a parent due to immigration enforcement. The intense fear triggered by the possibility of immigration enforcement also drives how immigrant families go about their day-to-day lives and their access to much needed benefits. And it has serious impacts on the overall health, mental health, and well-being of children in immigrant families and our newcomer students. On here, I linked a special report that was published earlier this year on the topic, which you will have access to, and I invite you to read more about the mental health impacts of the immigration policy changes on children and families. Also, let's not forget, and I don't think I'm preaching to the choir here, programs, schools, and staff are also impacted by the changes, right? So y'all are seeing a fluctuation in attendance, lower level of parent engagement, difficulty connecting with families to services, difficulty enrolling new families, or finding referrals for your newcomer students, changes in newcomers' behavior like social withdrawal or increase in anxiety and sometimes even bullying. And of course, staff stress, right? For all of the above reasons and other challenges such as uncertainty about program funding and job security. Similarly, I linked a related article to this slide, and I invite you to read that as well. So because of changes in policy and how seriously they're impacting many of you and the families that you serve, I'm going to go over some specific executive actions that directly relate to education. But first, let's talk about executive orders generally. So an executive order is a written directive signed by the president that orders the federal government to take specific actions to ensure the laws be faithfully executed. Executive orders do not create new laws, and executive orders cannot override or contradict existing federal laws and statutes. Courts can review and block executive orders if unconstitutional, and in fact, we've seen this happen time and time again over the last year. The number of executive orders released just this year, only on immigration alone, far outnumbers anything we've seen before, with over 175 immigration-related executive orders released only in the first 100 days. This is far more than what we saw during the first Trump administration. And because there are so many of them, I really cannot go over all of them today, and I will not, but I have linked a tracker that can provide you information, has a comprehensive list of all immigration-related executive orders issued so far, and you can access that during your own time, and I might actually drop it in the link so that you can take a look at it. Another one that I included is a tracker that includes summary of executive actions impacting education, which is also a really great resource. All right, so executive actions. This is the first one that I'm going to go over briefly. And again, I've linked a resource in the slides here that gives a lot more thorough information on this action. On the first day of the Trump administration, an important policy called the Sensitive Locations Memo was taken away. This policy had been around for more than 30 years and said that immigration agents should not take enforcement action in certain places, like schools, child care center, churches, and even some events like funerals. Both Democratic and Republican leaders have followed this rule for years because they understood that immigration enforcement should not stop families from getting basic services or going about important parts of their lives. After this rule was canceled, the new guidance tells immigration agents to simply use common sense if they take actions in or near these sensitive places. Taking away this long-standing protection led to many lawsuits and new bills across the country to try to bring the protections back. Because of these lawsuits, immigration enforcement is currently limited near churches and other religious spaces, and more cases are still in court advocating to bring protections back to other places. The second executive action that I want to cover very briefly is the order that declares English as the official language of the United States. Despite this executive order, language access is required by law because there are numerous laws and regulations that require language access, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Rehabilitations Act of 1973, the American with Disabilities Act, and much more. And like I mentioned before, executive orders cannot overturn existing laws or regulations, and so those protections stand. This means that everyone still has the legal right to get language help from programs and services that use federal money. This help can include talking with staff who speak their language, using trained interpreters, or getting papers that are translated. Students learning English are still entitled to the supports they need to join in public education, including programs and services that help them learn English. And lastly, just very importantly, every person in the United States, no matter where they're from, how well they speak English, or what their immigration status is protected from discrimination because of their background or language. This next slide goes over some data privacy and access to benefit issues that have come about because of changes in policy and executive actions. There is so much related to data privacy and access to benefits that I really can't go through all of it. But really, I think the biggest takeaway is that the fast-paced changes to federal policy are causing many to be too scared to apply for or access important public benefits and programs that they qualify for. So it's really important to stay informed and share accurate information. Here, I've included a link to the Protecting Immigrant Families Coalition. The website there. They are a national coalition of public benefits and immigrants' rights advocates that come together to help ensure families understand their rights to accessing benefits. Linked in this slide are a set of materials that include fact sheets for community members, and it also includes informational sheets for community helpers and leaders such as yourselves on issues like data privacy, accessing food programs, and understanding the public charge rule. I'm going to give you some top-level updates on each of those three issues, but really encourage you to look at the resources for more thorough information. So on data privacy, the law prohibits sharing personal information with immigration officials about people who use government-funded health and social services. But under the current administration, the government has sought to access data never before shared for immigration purposes, such as data from HUD, IRS, Social Security Administration, Medicaid, and SNAP. Advocates are concerned that information may sometimes be shared with immigration enforcement, even if that's against the law. There are numerous cases in litigation currently working to protect data. Programs and providers should avoid collecting information about immigration status unless it's required by law. If a program does collect sensitive information, then it's very good that they follow the best practices. They explaining the purpose for collecting the information, who has access to the information, and how the program plans to secure the privacy of the information. And so if you're referring somebody like a newcomer to a program and they're concerned about their privacy data, those are some questions that they can ask the program if they're being asked for information that they don't feel comfortable sharing. On food programs, most programs are income-based and do not collect immigration status. And SNAP is only available to U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, and some qualified immigrants. However, even if the parent does not qualify, it's important to remember that eligible children can still qualify. Lastly, on the public charge rule. So the public charge inadmissibility test explains when a person applies when a person is seeking to enter the United States or when a person is seeking to become a lawful permanent resident. It really is an administrative test that occurs and is triggered only during certain types of immigration applications. Many immigrants are exempt from public charge by laws that cannot be changed just by regulations alone. However, on November 17th, just a few days ago, the Department of Homeland Security published a notice of proposed rulemaking on public charge. This means that they're trying to change the public charge rule. These changes are removing guidelines added years ago that provided clarity and more specific guidelines about when public charge applies and when it doesn't. So far, what we know is that reversing the Biden era version of the rule would give immigrant officials a lot of discretion, which will make it harder for people to know how the public charge rule is actually being applied. For now, though, very importantly, the Biden public charge rule is still in effect until a new rule is finalized. And so I urge you to continue to go to pivcoalition.org as they are routinely updating their website, assessing and reviewing the proposed rule, and preparing materials to be available for a variety of audiences. All right. So lastly, on this section, I just want to go over what can you do if an executive action impacts your work. So if you think an executive action might impact the work that you're doing, it's very important that you speak to counsel before changing any of your programming or any of the services that you're providing to young people or newcomers. If you don't have access to counsel, then there's also community-based organizations that oftentimes support nonprofits or individuals. And then there's state leaders that we can look to for help clarifying information. So a lot of you work for departments, and so you should have access to counsel that should be able to clear up and give you guidance on federal policy that's coming down that you have questions about. But the most important really takeaway on all of this is to avoid aggressive and anticipatory compliance. So in other words, don't comply until it is confirmed you must, because there are so many changes happening right now that it's often very hard to keep up, and changes are often not actually necessary. All right, so now let's pivot from policy changes and executive actions to the rights and laws that protect newcomer students and educators in schools. So just broadly, starting off with nationwide protections, I want to just touch briefly on federal protections that generally apply to schools and child-serving organizations. Our U.S. Constitution grants us the right to many fundamental protections, like freedom of speech and the right to privacy. The Fourth Amendment in the Constitution says that people are protected from unfair search and seizure, and that officers cannot enter private spaces without a valid warrant signed by a judge. When the Constitution talks about private places, it means places where you should be able to feel safe and not watched by the government. These are spaces where people expect privacy, like a home, your bedroom, or a space that's closed to the public. On the other hand, places that are open to everyone, like a public park or a sidewalk, are not considered private in the same way. So the Fourth Amendment mostly protects the spaces where people live, where they learn, and where they take care of personal things. This means that law enforcement cannot go into places where people expect privacy, such as most school spaces and homes, unless they have that valid and signed judicial warrant. Additionally, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Plyler, which is the U.S. Supreme Court case that says that all children have a right to a free public education. This includes immigrant children. Additionally, I really want to point out, California provides additional protections to access to education for all children in California. These protections would remain in place even if somehow federal law, like the one from Plyler, were to be overturned. And lastly, just I think many of you are aware of FERPA, which limits the disclosure of student records. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide here. One moment. All right, now looking to California, the California laws that protect us. One of the laws that was passed in 2017 is AB 699. I think many of you have heard of AB 699 at this point. This is the law that eventually also directed our Attorney General's office to publish guidance for K through 12 schools with model policies to assist schools in responding to immigration issues. I have linked that guide in case you haven't seen it in this slide. And I will also share that the guidance is actually due to be updated in the beginning of December of this year. So a new version will be published that will include new laws from 2025, which I'm going to go over briefly in just a moment. Now, in addition to that, we have SB 54, the California Values Act, which provides local law enforcement agencies, prohibits local law enforcement agencies, including sheriffs, police department, and school police from enforcing federal immigration laws. Here I have linked a really good Know Your Rights fact sheet on this law. But to learn more, you could also go to iceoutofcalifornia.org. And lastly, I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the laws that we were tracking this year that passed. So 5 primary safe school bills that we tracked this year were signed by the governor in September and October. And those are the 5 that you're seeing on your screen right now. We have an explainer from All In for Safe Schools that goes in depth and actually has direct links to the bill language. And I'm going to drop the explainer in the chat. Oh, for some reason, the link didn't include. Let me share the link. There it is. And so briefly, let me just go over each of those 5. So SB 48 actually was very similar to a different law that was passed and was amended at the very last minute at the end of the year. This bill, as passed, is a bill that requires the Office of Civil Rights to employ a religious discrimination prevention coordinator, a race and ethnicity discrimination prevention coordinator, a gender discrimination prevention coordinator, and an LGBTQ+ discrimination prevention coordinator. And so these are to be appointed, I believe, by the governor, and you can find more information about the bill in that explainer. Now, AB 49 is the one that was passed that sort of inherited a lot of information and language for SB 48 as well. And this one is really the bill that regulates the entry of officers and employees of an agency conducting immigration enforcement into school sites, ensuring that specific protocols are followed before immigration enforcement officers can gain entry. We talked about the Fourth Amendment and how this already provides these protections. And so AB 49 really just codifies that into California law. But there are protections that are from this bill and also from our US Constitution. SB 98 is a bill that requires the governing bodies of local education agencies and institutions of higher education to notify students, their parents, and guardians. And this also includes teachers, staff, and other campus community members who work on campus. They need to be notified when immigration enforcement activity is confirmed on the school site or on a campus. AB 419, this one requires the governing board of a body of a local education agency to post the Know Your Rights guide developed by the Attorney General in the administrative building and on the website of the local education agency. And lastly, AB 495. That one actually has 3 parts. And so I encourage you to follow along using the explainer. But it does 3 things. It expands caregiver authorization in the state of California. And this is connected to the caregiver affidavit that a lot of us have heard about, that is used to help when families are planning, if I get detained or deported, who is going to take care of my child? A caregiver affidavit is an affidavit that a caretaker can sign to enroll children in school and allow them to continue to receive school-related sort of like health coverage and care. So that's the expanded, this one revises the definition of relative to expand the type of relative who is authorized to execute a caregiver affidavit. This also allows for joint guardianship. This is new to California. Usually, if you apply for a guardianship, you'd be limiting the parents' legal rights over the child. This new process and this new law actually allows for people to apply for guardianship jointly. So that's a parent and a non-parent person. And finally, there's the early care and education provision in the bill, which prohibits licensed childcare facilities from collecting information about the immigration or citizenship status of children and their families. And this actually also directs the AG to publish model policies for licensed child daycare facilities and licensed and exempt California state preschool programs. And this bill asks that the Attorney General's office make those updates by April of next year. All right, let me go to our next section. This one I'm going to go over fairly quickly. It's not too long, and then I will kick it over to Amber. This is really tips to implementing protection and practices to protecting newcomers. And so we have a few resources available on that. And I'm going to go directly to this one. This is an educator checklist for supporting immigrant students in schools. It has 5 steps. It's a 5-step advocacy guide aimed to help educators preserve the integrity of the learning environment and ensure safety of all students regardless of citizenship status. We published this earlier with the Century Foundation, and so we provided a link here to that fact sheet. And then lastly, our partner from All In for Safe Schools has this very neat Teach Plus AB 699 Policies Audit Guide, which actually allows you to review and update adopted board policies and administrative regulations, and to just compare and contrast what has your district done and what are some gaps in the policies that you can advocate for. And this QR code actually takes you to this great resource that LACO has created. It is their LACO toolkit. I share it broadly. I'm sure many of you have seen it already, but it's a very good toolkit that helps implement safe school policies. Oh, you know what? I lied about sections. I have one more. The last section that I'm going to cover now is access to public benefits for newcomers. I talked about this a little bit earlier. And so this is just very high level updates on the actual benefits. But first, I want to just sort of kind of give a primer that attempted changes to federal policy is, again, causing many to stop applying for benefits that they are legally eligible to access. And this is causing children, including newcomers with legal status in the US, and even US citizen children, to stop accessing important health and nutrition benefits that are important for them to grow up healthy and thrive. Individuals must weigh value of the critical healthcare and food assistance that they receive through Medi-Cal and CalFresh, with the possibility that information could be shared with the Department of Homeland Security or Immigration. And only they can decide what is right for them and their family. However, I am going to point out that if immigration already has their current contact information, then applying for or renewing benefits may not expose information that is not already known. When applying for Medi-Cal or CalFresh, it's just important to note that applicants do not need to share the immigration status or social security numbers for members who are not applying for the benefit themselves. And so the only information that needs to be provided of that sort is the actual applicant, not other people living in that household. And also I'll note many immigrants who are eligible for Medi-Cal and CalFresh are not at high risk of facing immigration enforcement. For example, naturalized citizens, legal permanent residents, and people that have special visas, such as refugee status, U visa, T visa, and others. Now, eligibility changes. So there are many changes to eligibility in Medi-Cal that have come from the state and from the federal government. If an individual is already enrolled in full scope Medi-Cal, the individual can stay covered. People who are 19 and older and only eligible under state funded adult expansion will not be able to submit new applications for full scope Medi-Cal starting the beginning of next year. And so if you know somebody who is undocumented, who has not applied for Medi-Cal yet, the window to apply so that they can take advantage of those services ends at the end of this year. If they apply by the end of this year, then they will be able to keep full Medi-Cal coverage and not just have access to emergency Medi-Cal. It's important to note, though, foster youth, non-minor dependents, and former foster youth up to the age of 26 are exempt from many of the changes that are happening to Medi-Cal. These populations should continue to receive full scope Medi-Cal without premiums or additional requirements. And I just want to note unaccompanied minors in ORR care are considered foster youth for Medi-Cal purposes. And lastly, you'll hear a lot about dental coverage going away in next year. But it is not going to go away for children, foster youth, or former foster youth. So just want to clarify that piece. Lastly, again, I've said this a lot, is there are big changes that the community need to be aware of so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. And so I encourage you to go to pivcoalition.org for resources for newcomers, for people in your community, and just for yourself to stay sort of up to date on the changes to eligibility, Medi-Cal, and other benefits. All right, well, with that, I'll stop there, and I will pass it over to you, Amber.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Super thorough, great information. I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health and social emotional support for students. And what can that look like? So I'm going to show you some different examples and give you some great resources as well. So first and foremost, right now, we are living in a time of uncertainty and fear, and maybe there is even a level of confusion of what is lawful at the state level versus the federal level versus, what's right in our hearts, and what we as educators can do about it, because educators are not really known for sitting quietly on the sidelines, right? At least the ones that I know and respect, right? So we want to make sure that you all have the tools to support the communities that you serve. And Lisa did a great job of discussing and outlining the legislation that can be leveraged to keep our students and families safe. I want to share a little bit about what you can do to support the well-being of your students and families within your context. Last weekend, I heard someone say, let us be the calm under the ocean. Like when all this chaos is happening at the surface, how can the community and schools come together in solidarity to support the socio-emotional wellness of our students and their families? So this brings me to Principle 1 of the California English Learner Roadmap Policy, of course. And we here at Californians Together say that Principle 1 is first for a reason. And here's what it actually says. Preschools and schools are responsive to different English learner strengths, needs, and identities, and support the socio-emotional health and development of English learners. Programs value and build upon the cultural and linguistic assets students bring to their education in safe and affirming school climates. Educators value and build strong family community and school partnerships. And today we're really going to unpack that phrase, safe and affirming school climates. So first, safe, we'll start there. It really brings us back to the legislative piece that Lisa walked us through earlier. And we must ask ourselves, are students and families physically safe on campus? Are they safe as they move through spaces to and from school? We also want students to feel emotionally safe, like they can breathe, right? They can let their guard down. Really, they can take kind of a sigh of relief when they arrive on campus, which brings us to affirming. And despite all the chaos, we want students to come to school and learn, right? And move forward in their educational journeys. So we as leaders, and if you are here, you are a leader in your spaces, need to help foster an environment where our newcomers and our students from immigrant families feel like they belong, and they're connected to school, really affirming that their language, culture, and their experiences and knowledge are valued and seen as a strength within our schools. So I want to really frame this discussion on this idea of healing-centered engagement. And in some of my research, I came across this article, which is linked here on this slide. And this quote really resonated with me. And just for context, the author, Dr. Sean Ginwright, describes a moment of clarity as he's facilitating like a young men's group, right? So it says, as I was explaining, one of the young men in the group named Marcus abruptly stopped me and said, I'm more than what happened to me. I'm not just my trauma. I was puzzled at first, but it didn't really take me long to contemplate what he was saying, right? And the author goes on to say that the term trauma-informed care didn't encompass the totality of this student's experience and focus on his harm, injury, and trauma. And for Marcus, the term trauma-informed care was akin to saying, you are the worst thing that happened to you, right? Um, and so when I read this for the first time, something shifted in my own learning around SEL and mental health and like these negotiating terms that, could be more deficit versus more assets forward. And the term healing centered engagement really expands how we think about responses to trauma and offers more holistic approaches to fostering well-being. And this holistic approach is not only, the pullouts to speak with counselors, youth groups, school psychologists, or in this case, a young men's group, which don't get me wrong, these are all wonderful things, but it's also about creating the structures at every single level of the system that shows our students that they are welcomed, and that they belong, right? So let's start at the top. Um, Lisa outlined some California laws that strengthens protections for students and families from immigration enforcement activities on school campuses. But when a school board passes a safe school resolution and implementation plan, it sends a clear message of solidarity with immigrant communities. These resolutions reassure students and families that their rights and safety are protected, and that lowers the affective filter and reduces stress, allowing students to focus and engage more fully. For leaders considering this step, I've attached the American Federation of Teachers resource, which has suggested language and guidance for crafting a safe schools resolution, helping ensure policies are both meaningful and also actionable, which is key, right? At the next level, we think about kind of district leadership and the message that they send. So this video highlighted here is a collaboration between Elodia Ortega Lampkin, who's the superintendent of Woodland Joint Unified, and the chief of Woodland Police Department. And together they affirm students' rights to education, and they reinforce that schools are safe, supportive spaces for all students. And I think that this is just a really powerful example of community leaders and schools standing together to communicate unity, safety, and care. And when families and students hear this consistent, aligned messaging like this, it builds trust and reassurance that the learning environment is designed to protect and support them. And that reassurance is not only important, but it's foundational, right? When students feel safe, valued, and emotionally supported, their affective filter lowers, right? Again, and their stress and anxiety decrease, which directly supports better mental health and emotional regulation. So the next level I wanted to talk about was at the site level, the administrator, the leadership level. And it's really important to get a clear picture of your current climate on campus. Ensuring safe and affirming schools is really foundational, and it's a responsibility of school leaders that involves policies, practices, relationships, and also really this continuous monitoring. It's not like, oh, we did that self-reflection 5 years ago. I think we're good, right? No, this is ongoing. So I pulled these tools here from Californians Together resources. The first two tools are from our EL Roadmap Admin Toolkit, Volume 2, on creating assets in student responsive schools. And then the third tool is from our Newcomer Professional Learning series. And these tools can support reflection about where there might still be work to do to enact the commitment to safe and affirming schools, and to really consider the various structures and practices in the life of the school that show students that their cultures and languages are valued. The next item I wanted to highlight here, this is more like for the classroom professional learning level. And this, if you haven't seen this site here, M Schools, it was founded in 2018 by two immigrant women with more than 20 years of combined experiences as educators working in the intersection of immigration and education. And this is a powerful tool to find like these TK through 12 resources, protocols, and much, much more. The Educator Resource Guide that's linked here is a great one pager and reminder of best practices educators can do and probably still do to support immigrant students and families. And I feel like this specific resource is one of those ones that can be like pinned on your bulletin board behind your desk. At least that's where I visualize it in my classroom. Also, I love the resource focus on front office staff. So our colleagues, who are some of the first faces that students and families see when they come to campus, are equipped with the knowledge and best practices needed to support families as they navigate through this time. Um, Next, I wanted to highlight Reimagining Migration, and this is a wonderful place for teachers and other instructional leaders to find fantastic resources in supporting students' mental health and well-being, like at this classroom level. The site that is linked here has over 500 curated materials designed to really transform how schools and educators approach migration, inclusion, and belonging. And as I was perusing the site, I found so many articles and planning tools and lessons. And some of the highlights were like I found one that was about building belonging for immigrant students, where it's a staff reflection guide, and it offers all these reflective questions that you can really kind of search internally and see how you are individually, but as a staff building belonging for immigrant students. The other one that I really wanted to lift up was this one called Moving Stories, Building Connection and Belonging in Times of Division. And I love this one because it helps all students, right? Because we want all students to have this idea of like building empathy, building belonging. And this is through the power of migration narratives, which is great for, curriculum. Also, I wanted to highlight here at Californians Together, we have the Support for Immigrant and Refugee Students, our SIRS project, and it's a collaboration between Loyola Marymount and Californians Together. And this is curriculum that is in two different phases, but the one that I'm showing you here it's leveled from K2 to 3-5 to grades 6 through 12, and it has the first lesson is really supporting like resilience and social emotional learning, and then the second one is more literature based. It's focused around a text and around literature discussions. And so you can go to the link that's there, caltalk.co /SIRS, and you can really kind of explore those resources. So when I think about when I say every level of our system, that really also includes our students, right? And we want to elevate students' power. We want to elevate their autonomy so that they can be advocates for themselves and their own well-being. And this mental health grounding and reflection toolkit can be a powerful place for students to reflect, to kind of jot down their notes, and maybe really like practicing this, activity of journaling and organizing their thoughts and kind of uplifting themselves through self-reflection. So I wanted to make sure that you all have this resource. The next one that I wanted to highlight was through CalHope. And in January 2024, California launched two virtual services platforms, Bright Life Kids and Soluna, to expand access to free behavioral health support for children, youth, and families. So, Bright Life provides children 0 to 12 and their families with free telehealth tools and resources to navigate behavioral health challenges, regardless of insurance or immigration status. And these resources include one-on-one coaching, care navigation, and peer support services. And then Soluna is an app for our teens and young adults, ages 13 through 25, and they can just download it right onto their phone, right? And receive these services. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to calhope.org. And you can spread the word and download the toolkit and one pager that really talks about the Bright Life for kids ages 0 to 12. Um, the, the last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of mental health and this like holistic approach, it also has to include our families, right? And I wanted to highlight this step-by-step family preparedness plan. And I'm sure some of us have, seen this in this space, but I just wanted to point to you these two videos as well that can be resources for you. So the short video is, again, very short. It's like 1.5 minutes. And I think that this would be great for a staff meeting. It's an overview of the process. And then the full video here, I think this would be great to like actually sit with families and walk through step by step what this process can look like when families have a plan. It can again lower that affective filter, and even though there's still like fear and uncertainty, knowing that there's kind of a plan B or an action plan in place can help students feel like again like they can breathe, that they can go to school, that they know what's going to happen next, which is so important. Um, and lastly, I want to share a resource created for immigrant families called A Love Letter and Support Guide for Families Navigating Harmful Immigration Rates and Policies. And this is created by the National Parents Union, Little Justice Leaders, and just these amazing, passionate advocates. This guide was created with immigrant parents in mind and shaped by the insight and experiences of families impacted by immigration policies through the country. This would be such a great resource to send out to your ELACs and your DLACs and to your families that you're meeting with, or just kind of like overall in an email blast. This guide includes grounding exercises for immigrant parents, self-care and mental health reflection exercises, resources, guidance on supporting children's mental health by age group, know your rights materials, which are so important, community affirmations and advice from other parents, safety planning guidance. And this love letter to immigrant parents encourages parents to reflect on their own mental health and affirms their family's right to feel, dignified and safe. And so I want to end this section with it has a kind of a snapshot of the first page, and it says, "We see you, we see you beyond the gaze of dehumanizing immigration policies. We see you trying to live a life that makes your ancestors proud, trying to break cycles, build something new, and get free. The struggle is real, and we couldn't stay quiet. We can't stay quiet. We won't stay quiet." So I just wanted to finish the section with that. Together, we can mobilize and move this system forward to really better support our students and their families during this like watershed moment, right? Um, all of the resources that we have here are linked in the slide deck. We wanted to also share that, there are 3 things you can do, spread power, don't panic, right? We don't want a place where we're, spreading fear, but we're spreading knowledge and love and lessons learned. And then make a plan. Whether that you're at the, the very top level, school board, superintendent, if you're a classroom teacher, if you're a parent or a community member, there is always something that we can do to support our families and our students. And so I know that the Q&A has been going on this whole time. I wanted to kind of open it up to see if there was anything left unanswered or if we have other questions. I'm going to look real quick because I've been talking.
I just wanted to uplift. I did answer, I think all the questions that I found. There was one really good question, inquiring about judicial warrants and asking about whether it's required for the warrant to have a wet signature versus law enforcement entities using a copy. And so I added the answer here. I'll also drop it in the chat because I wanted to link. Let me see if I can copy this. I wanted to link to the resource that we use from NILC on warrants. But just like the very straightforward answer is that no, yes, it can be a copy. And sometimes warrants are actually signed digitally. And so there isn't actually that wet sort of ink anymore. Sometimes there is, but it's not required because of that. There was also a question earlier on that the reality is within many schools, newcomers and families don't feel like they belong or are welcome. How can we change this? This was right as your section was getting started, Amber. And so I just pointed out, that entire last section talking about welcoming schools, and supporting at every level is really important. And I linked the reimagining migration resources that you included into there. But really, that entire section has a lot of incredible links regarding that specific topic. I think that's, is there anybody else that has a question live? One other question that we received was parents need interpreters in person during conferences with teachers. And now with the funding cuts, how will schools be affected? And really, I mean, there's no great answer to this, right? Unfortunately, funding cuts to education will likely reduce the ability to provide translators for parent-teacher conferences by directly probably cutting funding for interpretation services and support programs. And unfortunately, that leaves schools with more responsibility to find and fund these services themselves. So there's a lot of unknown, a lot of things to navigate. But, just taking it one step at a time. Those were all the questions that I see in the Q&A. So I'll just give a little bit more space to see if anybody wants to raise a hand or drop another question in the chat.
And it looks like there's one more question. How can we request more extra programs for newcomers? I'm wondering, Amber, you were a teacher and a specialist in Grossmont. How would you go about advocating at the local level, whether at the site level, whether at the district level, with the school board? What are your thoughts on extra programs for newcomers in the request process?
Well, that's a great question, Sam. And I'll actually kind of throw it over my mentor and professor and fabulous person, Dr. Christina Alfaro. When I was a coordinator, she told me I was expressing the frustration. We have these newcomer students. We need acceleration. We need enrichment. We don't just need intervention and pullouts, right? But nobody's inviting me to these spaces. And she told me basically to just bring a chair to these meetings, to leadership, and just and sit down and really bring this need forward. The thing that helped me the most was the data, not only this like high level satellite data that is, at our fingertips, especially if we have things like, elevation and so forth, but really that street data of what the students are actually saying, what do they need, what do they want. And so you kind of like you can back it up with, well, all of our students really need English credit. Why don't we have an accelerated summer program? And find ways to be creative in funding it. And kind of taking pieces of different, cash flows and monies, and putting it towards things that would really make a difference for students. So bring a chair and sit down and start talking to people. That's one of my favorite things.
Well said. Now, a lot of resources were shared. The slide deck is an incredible reference. And as Crystal just put in the chat, an email with links to the recording, the slide deck, and all those resources mentioned today will be shared to registrants. In the near future, they'll also be hosted at calnew.net. In the meantime, I want to thank our presenters from CalTOG, TCP, and All In for Safe Schools for an incredible presentation. And thank you everyone for sharing the space today and for all the work that you do for our students. Have a great rest of the Thursday night and a great Thanksgiving.